You know this fucking deal that I'm about to sign? The fuck is that, you know? I'll tell you what it is. It's them selling me, not the other way around. It's me being a hypocrite is what it is. So, you know what? I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving! The show goes on! This is my home! They're gonna need a wrecking ball to take me out of here.
What is going on, everybody? Welcome in to the reveal of the number 3 team in this Power Rankings Deep Dive series today. We'll be taking an extended look at the San Francisco 49ers. The band is back together again. Brandon Ayuk says, I'm not going nowhere. And this team, who's been just every year knocking at the door, right on the pedestal, is this the year that they can finally get over that last hurdle? Well, today, we'll talk about if they have all of the pieces that they need to get that done. Before we do get started, though, if you could take just a second to hit that like button, it's a free and easy little thing that really does support my channel. I really appreciate it. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss our remaining couple of deep dives here, my full predictions show here on Thursday, and of course, my regular season content. But without further ado, let's begin by taking a look at this team's offseason, where they got better, where they got worse. Starting with the coaching staff, definitely some movement, but I do say net neutral as what has kind of been the case in San Francisco. Anytime another team is looking to fill up their coaching staff, they look at San Francisco and the LA Rams and say, yeah, we'll take some of that. So this year it is Clint Kubiak back into the OC ranks, getting hired with New Orleans. He was the co-offensive coordinator last year. They also fired Steve Wilkes, who stepped in as their defensive coordinator last year to replace DeMeco Ryans. And they weren't really thrilled with how that certainly ended or really went last year. And then they are kind of well-equipped with their offensive staff. You could list Chris Forrester, who was the other co-OC last year. He's now the full-time OC, but with Shanahan and Forrester, they feel just fine with the offense, I think. And then defensively, they make a couple of hires/promotions. Internally, they promote Nick Sorensen to defensive coordinator, and he's going to kind of share his vision for this defense with now assistant head coach of the defense, Brandon Staley, who comes over from the Chargers. Kind of a two-pronged approach with this defensive staff. Overall, though, I don't think it's going to make a huge impact on, this team versus last year's team. I do say neutral for coaching. But then at quarterback, we haven't really factored in backup quarterbacks too much unless there's like major injury concerns on the starter. I think for the most part, we all prefer Sam Darnold to Josh Dobbs. The Vikings certainly do. There might be some Pastronaut truthers out there, but, Darnold really only played in that meaningless Week 18 game for this team last year, and they bring in Josh Dobbs as the backup. So I say neutral at quarterback. At running back, I'm going to say slightly downgraded. They did lose Elijah Mitchell for the year. In my opinion, one of the best backup running backs in the league. Not the end of the world. They have some other bodies that they like there, but I did like Mitchell. It was a bummer to see him go down. They also drafted Isaac Guerendo in the 4th round. Maybe some more opportunities heading his way with that injury. But then at tight end, slightly downgraded. Charlie Warner was a nice tight end too for this team, and they were kind of out trying to find another dude. They tried to steal restricted free agent Brock Wright from the Lions. The Lions said absolutely not. The Niners end up settling on veteran Eric Saubert there, but I don't think he's as good as Charlie Warner. But then slightly upgraded at wide receiver. All they're losing is Ray McLeod, who played a 5th of their snaps last year. They spent a 1st-round pick on Ricky Pearsall. Thank God he's okay. Shot in an armed robbery attempt, walked himself to the hospital. What a badass. Fortunately, it doesn't sound like it's going to set him back too much. And then also a 4th-round pick on the speedster, Jacob Cowing. So some injection of youth there with the wide receivers. And then with the offensive line, Niners fans would want me to say this is upgraded because Dominique Puny will be starting at guard with the injury to John Feliciano. Is that an upgrade from last year? No. Feliciano played like 12 games last year. They're hoping to get about that from him this year. So I didn't want to put him as a loss necessarily. I'm just going to say neutral. We'll talk more about this offensive line later on in the video. But pretty much status quo with the offense, with just some, minor sliding up and down with some of the depth pieces, really. But then on the defense, some more significant change, some for the better, some for the worse. The interior of the defensive line losing a couple of big pieces from last year, most notably Eric Armstead, the biggest loss for this team by far. Really good player. They're going to miss what they got from him. But they also lose Javon Kinlaw. We just broke down with the Jets. He got a, half-decent contract, 1 year, $7 million deal, the former first-round pick here. Played well in a rotational role. So a couple of legit losses there, but they did sign Malik Collins, who's probably, as a player somewhere in between what Kinlaw was last year and what Eric Armstead was. So not a bad signing, but definitely downgraded with the interior of the defensive line. And then a lot of movement with this edge group. Chase Young was not retained, who they acquired mid-season. Clelin Ferrell, who played a third of their snaps, and Randy Gregory played a quarter of their snaps. Those guys are all gone. They bring in Leonard Floyd and Yetur Gross-Matos. I think I do prefer Floyd and Gross-Matos to that trio on the left. It's nothing major, but I will say slightly upgraded. Even if you don't have the allure of a Chase Young and what he could theoretically be someday. We've been saying that for a long time now. At linebacker, this one's tough. I mean, Dre Greenlaw tore his Achilles in the Super Bowl. He's starting the season on the PUP, and it is just a little bit hard to know just how much time he's going to miss. You'd think at least the first 2 months of the season. But they supplemented it well with a nice signing of Devondre Campbell, who can still play a little bit. I think he can hold down the fort in the meantime. And Greenlaw did miss some time last year, too. He only played 3/4 of their snaps. And then they're also flipping Oren Burks for a 7th-round pick in Tatum Bethune. Gotta say, slightly downgraded on this, and then potentially fully downgraded depending how much time Dre Greenlaw misses and what he looks like in that first year back from the Achilles injury. At cornerback, though, this was definitely upgraded. All they're losing is Isaiah Oliver, played about a third of their snaps from the slot. A nice trio of additions here. Isaac Yiadom, who had a bit of a breakout year for the Saints at 28 years old last year after bouncing all around the league. Then they spent a 2nd-round pick on Renardo Green, talented physical corner, and brought in Rock Ya-Sin, who's been pretty solid. So definitely improving the starting room and the depth. I like what they did at corner this offseason for not a lot of money either. At safety, I will say neutral. Tashawn Gibson was not exciting, but he was very solid. But they are looking forward to getting a full season out of Talanoa Hufanga. Went down around week 7, week 8 last year. And then Malik Mustafa, one of my favorite sleepers in this draft class. Really excited for his future. Not sure how much he's going to play this year. You've got some exciting youth, and you think they've set themselves up pretty well for the future. But will this year's safety room be better than last year's safety room with Tashawn Gibson there? It's kind of hard to say. I'm gonna say neutral there, and then no change with the special teams either. So not necessarily a silent offseason for the Niners. They've been trying to pick up some value, fill in some holes in the roster where they can, and then their primary focus is keeping these guys around, these superstars on this team. They paid Christian McCaffrey earlier in the offseason. They obviously just locked up Ayuk, and now they're trying to make Trent Williams happy for week 1 here. They have till Monday to get that done. I think they can make it work. But, the cap is tightening up, and it's becoming harder and harder for the Niners to keep all these guys and continue to make splashes. So for what they had to work with, I think, John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan did a pretty good job assembling this 2024 Niners roster. And we'll go through these position groups in depth, ranking how they stack up against the rest of the league after our next segment here, because we are first off going to talk about this coaching staff. And some people will agree with this, others will disagree, but I do have Kyle Shanahan as the best head coach in the NFL. I think what he's shown to consistently have one of the best offenses in the league and to have this team basically no shorter than the NFC Championship every year with Matt Ryan, Jimmy Garoppolo, now Brock Purdy, I think it's insane. Like, just think about it for a second. Think about all of the time we as a football people talk about the importance of quarterback and how if you want to put yourself basically where the Niners have been, you have to have a tier 1 quarterback. You got to, take your chances to go get that elite guy. Well, as long as Kyle Shanahan just has a solid quarterback, he's going to put you in the mix there. And to me, that is the most impressive thing you could say about any coach in the league. And that is with all due respect to Andy Reid and Sean McVay. I think the world of those guys as well. But I just think from a schematic point of view and just his ability as a play caller to basically be that 12th member of the offense in there feeling things out, his ability to set up plays, make something look some way earlier in the game and then break out the same look later, but mix it up based on how the defense reacted to pre-snap motion or a certain formation, and come out with these impact plays as the game goes on. Not to mention just his ability to kind of have that predictive nature as a play caller, to understand tendencies on the fly, knowing what coverage he's going to get, how to push the right button, get that right coverage beater, and scheme guys open for his quarterback. Not to mention all of the different wrinkles they do in the run game. These positionless players rotating in and out of the backfield, pre-snap motion, the evolution of his run game where he's still a very wide zone heavy play caller. That is the Shanahan scheme that we've been, discussing for 3/4 of the teams in the league right now. Like, that's another thing. The majority of the league is trying to copy his system. It's another reason why I've got him number 1. But he's historically been that, wide zone, play action heavy offense. It's all still in there, absolutely. But his evolution within this offense to bring in more counter and power and trap and just vary up the run game so well. The evolution of adding RPOs to this offense as well. And tying that all together into this perfectly designed offense, it's just a really special thing. And if we were fantasy drafting head coaches in a vacuum with nobody on the team yet, I'm taking Kyle Shanahan number 1. Even if you can sit here and critique some game management stuff, some clock management stuff, there are some frustrating drawbacks with Kyle Shanahan in that regard. I'll give you that. And even some of the roster management stuff, it's John Lynch's team from a front office perspective, but Kyle, I think, does have final say. And the Trey Lance pick every year, drafting a 3rd string running back, 4th string tight end that don't make the team within a year. Every year they seem to have one of the more head scratching picks in the draft. I don't think they had much of a plan for this whole Brandon Ayuk saga either, drafting Ricky Pearsall in the 1st round, and now it's like, how does he really play into the picture long term? There are some things that you can nitpick with Kyle Shanahan, but I definitely don't think it overwrites what he brings to the table as the offensive mastermind of the NFL. So needless to say, their offensive coaching ranks come in as high as they go. I have him in a tier alone for run game coaching, 1st in the league, and then for pass game coaching, tied with 5 coaches. Again, I have the utmost respect for some of these other great coaches in the league, so I'm not necessarily going to put him over like Andy Reid and Sean McVay from a pass game perspective. All these guys are very incredible, but the coaching culture rankings are very high too. While you can have some nitpicks about his overall style running this organization, there's no denying that this is an incredible culture in San Francisco. They've earned the utmost benefit of the doubt, which is what this ranking is effectively here for. It is that benefit of the doubt slider for these teams. But also, this is a team that they're a hard-ass football team on the turf. Like, Kyle's ability to get these guys to just play at 150% every snap is really, really impressive. The offense just plays faster and more physical than a lot of teams in the league. So I think from a sort of rah-rah inspirational aspect, Kyle Shanahan gets these guys going too. And then we mentioned Chris Forrester is the offensive coordinator here. I think Kyle just got sick of losing his coordinator every single year, and he started to kind of set this up in a way that, like, maybe teams won't poach his staff every single year. In the case of Chris Forrester, he's been around the Shanahan family for a long time. He coached under his dad. He's been coaching with Kyle for the better part of a decade now. Kyle trusts him, but he's like 60 years old. I don't think anybody looks at Chris Forrester as a head coaching candidate. So Kyle can keep some of the continuity there with him. And that's yet another feather in Kyle's cap for why I have him number one, is just this staff has just been poached left and right for 5 years now, and he continues to have this team looking the way they do. But that takes us to the defensive side of things, and it's going to be a new look staff in many ways here, moving on from Coach Wilks. And likewise here, I think the Kyle's kind of set this up in a way that they're probably not going to poach these dudes, because Brandon Staley, nobody in their godforsaken mind would hire him as a head coach again. He goes back to the defensive coordinator ranks, where he was pretty good for several years, and then promotes the younger Nick Sorensen as the defensive coordinator. But it's like, yeah, but it's not all his defense. He's working with Brandon Staley. So is another team going to look at this and be like, yeah, Nick Sorensen, we got to hire him, without knowing for sure how much Brandon Staley's voice is being heard in that locker room. So I don't know. That's just a theory that Shanahan has started to craft his staff in a way that it won't get poached every year. We'll see how that ages. But I do like this combination. It does just make sense to me. This team is not going to change up the type of scheme that they've been running. They want to be in Robert Saleh's 4-2 defense. And if you look at the two kind of coaching trees that these two guys come from, the meeting of the middle of that is Robert Saleh's defense in a nutshell. Nick Sorensen comes from that Seattle cover 3 era. Really, the majority of his time has been coaching under Gus Bradley and Dan Quinn, and then a little bit under this defense under DeMeco Ryans, who followed Robert Saleh. But then you have Brandon Staley, who comes from the quarters happy, split safety, Fangio style defense. And, for those that have followed the series, we've talked about Robert Saleh's system with the Jets, the Texans, what the Packers are looking to do here. And Saleh's defense is almost the perfect hybrid of the Seattle cover 3 system and Vic Fangio's system, at least from a coverage perspective, where cover 3 and cover 4, using cover 6 as a change-up to that, are going to be the prevailing coverages there. So you definitely have the right sort of coaching influence to come in and coach this team up and design, at least from a coverage perspective, what this team is looking for and looking to run on the back end. And then up front, you can't discuss this 49ers coaching staff really without Chris Kachurik into the picture here. I mentioned earlier it's a 2-pronged approach. You could argue this is a 3-pronged approach. But Chris Kachurik has been pretty clear, like, I'm good, man. I don't need to be a defensive coordinator. I don't need to be a head coach. I'm happy to just be the best defensive line coach in the league. And in terms of this 4-man front, I think I regret saying it's a 2-pronged approach. This is a 3-pronged approach. Staley and Sorensen will be running the coverages and the play calls, really, and Chris Kachurik will be crafting the many stunts that this team wants to run and getting these guys ready to get after it with four men up front. And that's another thing we've talked about with these Saleh-style systems is how much these guys lean into running those stunts up front, whether that's an ET stunt where you're taking the end, crashing him in, having the tackle loop around, or a TE stunt, which is doing the opposite, having the tackle kind of blow up the inside shoulder of the tackle, occupy the guard with a great first step and a ton of power, allow someone like Nick Bosa or Leonard Floyd to loop back inside unblocked, or even getting crazier than that, TT stunts where you're doing the same thing with the 2 tackles, or using a disruptor to penetrate and scheme up an open blitz look for a linebacker. The Niners have and always been as good as anybody at doing that. I think Chris Kachurik, as the defensive line coach, is a huge part of that. Should not see any change there. So, yes, we're only listing Brandon Staley and Nick Sorensen, but Chris Kachurik is probably the most capable man in the building between the three, and everything does just make sense for me. They're not going to come in terribly high in the rankings because that's how we've done it in this series. If it's a new look, unproven staff, I'm not going to rank them out exceptionally high, but still very good grades for the 49ers defensive coaching staff. 17th to 21st for pass defense coaching with a B grade. I will remind you, there are a ton of really great defensive coordinators in the league right now. So 17th to 21st is probably better than it sounds. And then a little bit higher for run defense. Similar B grade, but 11th to 17th. And I could see this entire staff really getting comfy here. I think Kyle Shanahan does see what's happened with the Chiefs, where they've had Steve Spagnuolo, and that continuity on that side of the ball has been obviously invaluable to the Chiefs. And maybe they're trying to kind of replicate a little bit of that here and just kind of have, I would say, these three guys, again, with Chris Kachurik being the unlisted guy there as a part of this staff. And hope that this defense can be one of the most well-coached defenses in the league, if not this year, sustainably into the future. And I'm frankly kind of excited for how they've set this up and think that they will get there. Obviously, a very special staff that we don't just think is good enough to get them to the Super Bowl. We've seen them get this team to the Super Bowl or right at the doorstep every single year, and really no reason to think that's going to change with this coaching staff and what they bring to the table. But now, before we dive into this roster position by position, if you've enjoyed the series and you're looking for a way to support the channel, but you're also stoked for football season and you're looking for a way to enjoy it even more, well, Underdog Fantasy and their Pick'em contests are the best way to do both those things. You'll support my channel by signing up using promo code TFG, but their Pick'em contests are also the best way to ramp up your interest in any given game, keep you glued to your seat, even if it's a blowout or a crummy Thursday night football matchup. You'll be waiting to see if that receiver is going to get that 7th reception that you need, if that quarterback's going to throw the interception that you picked him to have. With Pick'em, you're stringing together at least 2 player stats, higher or lower. And the more you get right, the bigger your payouts, and these payouts can be massive. And right now, Underdog is running a special for the NFL kickoff. You can get a free pick on Travis Kelce. The man just needs 1 yard. Do you think Patrick Mahomes is going to throw him the football at least once? It's a pretty safe pick there, in my opinion. So you can get your season on Underdog off to the right note right now if you sign up using promo code TFG. That is at Underdog Fantasy, or just scan the QR code on the screen right now. Thank you to Underdog for supporting this channel. And now let's go ahead and get into this roster breakdown, where we're going to start with the quarterback conversation with the Niners. And I like Brock Purdy, man. I really do. I hate the way people discuss him as if he's just like Case Keenum on a run with a super team right now. Like, he is so much more than that. He is a really good quarterback. And by the way, hasn't even played 2 full seasons yet. And I think some people will be surprised to see that I put the up arrow on Brock Purdy. I think this guy is only going to get better. And, there's a lot of really good quarterbacks in the NFL right now. I wish I could sit here and have Brock Purdy ranked higher, but he does come in as my 17th ranked quarterback. That even surprised me a little bit, but there's a lot of guys coming back from injury. He just gets pushed down the pecking order a little bit, but I really do think he's a good quarterback, man. And yes, it's true. He is really good at running this system. His ability as a point guard to play on time, to throw with anticipation, that quick, smooth release is an asset inside this offense that does need that point guard to have that quick release, to be able to throw the ball rapidly with accuracy, to get the ball into Debo's hands on a bubble screen quickly, or to run the RPOs in this offense. And is that an easier thing to do? Yes, but not everybody can do that. I mean, look at Justin Fields in Chicago. It took the dude 3 seconds to throw a bubble screen, so it does matter. But what people don't realize is there's so much more to Brock Purdy than just playing point guard and throwing bubble screens and RPOs. Yes, he has incredible playmakers around him, and yes, that elevates him. But Brock Purdy himself is a playmaker. There are 2 things to his game as a quarterback that I noticed getting through his film that I'm like, he does do some shit that other quarterbacks don't do. Number 1 is this guy has really special overall ball placement and ability to kind of have those anticipation throws that are leveraged away from the defender. Very like nuanced high-end quarterbacking stuff, whether it's throwing a back shoulder up the seam away from a split safety defense, or if he's throwing a jump ball and scramble drill, understanding where the defender is coming from and putting it on the outside shoulder or the opposite side of where that defender is going to be. He's got really good ability to throw those kind of timing back shoulders where only his receiver is going to get it, or high pointing a ball over the middle. Like, he makes some throws that at first glance maybe don't look like anything special, and oftentimes they might even look like dangerous throws, but you watch it back on the film, you slow it down a little bit, and you're like, no, he knew what he was doing there. Like, he threw that into a very tight window with incredible ball placement. So yes, he might have the weakest arm of any starter in the league, and that does limit his overall upside and the amount of throws that are available to him, but he does make up for a lot of that by being able to make a lot of throws with his instincts and ball placement that, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 other quarterbacks in the league are capable of. So he needs to get credit for that. And the other thing is, he's a legitimate playmaker, like in terms of play extension, scramble drill. People don't realize how good he is at eluding sacks, extending plays. Yes, a lot of those instincts to throw on the run we just talked about show up in scramble drill, but he has real pocket presence. If a quick rusher gets in, he might be staring downfield, but he can sense that and get out of it in a hurry. He understands how to manage that space within the pocket to buy time when he needs to. And he'll stand in there too. By the way, this isn't a play extension thing, but it is a pocket presence thing. He'll stand in there knowing he's going to get drilled, and he is tough as shit. He will take a hit and still drop a dime. That touchdown throw to George Kittle against the Jags is the perfect example of that, but countless times this dude is stepping up into the face of pressure and still throwing with timing, anticipation, and accuracy. But again, he pairs that pocket presence with that natural ability of knowing how and when to use his feet to extend plays, and it circles back to what we've already said, but his arm talent is there. It's not a strong arm, but he makes some exceptional throws on the run. He had that throw rolling out on the run to George Kittle against the Packers in the playoffs. Like, that was an absolute dime. So don't let that fool you to the sense that he doesn't have arm talent. He absolutely does. Now, that's not to say he doesn't have weaknesses, right? He's my 17th ranked quarterback. Number one, I do recognize, like, he makes some really special plays happen, but maybe 2 out of 3 plays, he's getting a ton of production that is either Shanahan or Ayuk or Debo or Kittle or McCaffrey doing a lot of the heavy lifting for him. I recognize that, and you do take some credit away from Brock Purdy for that. I think most people agree with that. And am I a little worried that when they have to pay Brock Purdy $55 million a year and they start losing some of these guys, that even if Brock Purdy gets better himself, his production comes way down? Yeah, I am worried about that. That this has all been, the Brock Purdy experience to this point in time is and has been all under the context that he's making $950,000. But there are some aspects to his game as well that do have some drawbacks. And to me, one of them is an area that I think he can very much improve upon, and another is an area that might always hold him back a little bit. So number one is going to be the processing and decision-making that I think can absolutely improve. Number two is going to be the arm talent that leads to some inaccurate throws and inability to always control the football to the degree that he needs to. He can spray some balls, and some of those are into traffic that can get intercepted. But when it comes to the processing and decision-making, I think the aggressive tendencies when he gets into scramble drill to make some of those incredible throws that he makes, I think you'll live with 2 or 3 interceptions a year where he forces a little bit too much. I mean, that happens with all the game's great quarterbacks, right? I would much rather have the guy that is capable of making those plays in scramble drill than to not have that guy and to have 3 or 4 interceptions throughout the course of the season than to have the guy that's just timid and doesn't make those plays for you. So I'm not necessarily worried about that. But in terms of just general processing and decision-making as a drop-back passer, Yes, of course it can get better. He's heading into year 3. And yeah, he does have some bad reads. He has some ugly interceptions where he doesn't see a linebacker or he misreads the coverage. He's got the interception against the Ravens, for example, where I think he misread it as single high or didn't fully understand that you can't throw a backside post into quarters coverage. Kyle Hamilton was just sitting on it. He goes back to his second read. He puts it in the middle of the field and gets in trouble doing that. And then besides making mistakes, there is definitely room for him to continue to speed up his anticipation, to continue to always make the right read and process coverages and run this offense to an even higher level within structure. And I think that's the thing. If he's going to get paid a lot of money, that's the area that you do want to see that just continue to get better so that you feel pretty good that this is a top 12 or so quarterback in the league. I think Brock Purdy can get there. Hell, I would even go a step further and say from a physical tools standpoint and when Brock Purdy is at his best, if the processing and decision-making can become a consistently elite tool for Brock Purdy, there could be a little Joe Burrow in Brock Purdy, but that's putting the cart before the horse a little bit. I think if he can go from where he is now as maybe the 12th best processing quarterback to the 5th, that's how you can start to talk about paying Brock Purdy can be worth it, and he can continue to play at a high level within this system as they start to lose some of these guys in time. But then the second point, the lack of arm strength, the lack of constant command of the football. You know, it's an up and down conversation, right? Because he makes some really incredible throws, showing off arm talent on the run, ball placement, but there are definitely throws where he's trying to high point that throw over the middle, or the ball does just straight up get away from him, and it can end up sailing, it can end up in harm's way. And, you know, I don't really see anything from Brock Purdy from a technique standpoint that can really clean that stuff up. I think when you do lack a really strong arm, that can happen, and it can hurt your overall just constant command of the football week in, week out. So that, I would say, is probably what does inevitably keep him out of the top 10 quarterbacks in the league, is you might just get some inconsistency in terms of accuracy on a week-to-week basis. And again, that does overall limit like what throws are available to him. The field does shrink down a little bit for Brock Purdy, whereas it doesn't for pretty much every top 10 quarterback in the league. And even Joe Burrow, if that's like the best case scenario for Brock Purdy, it might not be the best case scenario, because even Joe Burrow has a little bit more ability to push that ball down the field and a little bit more velocity when he rips it between the middle of the defense. So again, I really like Brock Purdy. I think within the confines of this team, he is absolutely a tier 3 quarterback, which by definition for me is a quarterback with a great situation. You can win a Super Bowl with them. And then I'm ready to just kind of pause the conversation there for this season, because we are going to get to a point where we get another year to see what, year 3 of growth looks like for Brock Purdy. And then we'll get to see kind of into year 2, into year 3, once they're paying him, what the team around him starts to look like. And then maybe we do come back and are a little bit more critical about how much they paid him and if they can get this done. But for now, where we are, I will continue to defend Brock Purdy. He is not Case Keenum. He's not Jimmy Garoppolo. He's a much better player than those two guys. But let's move on. For the backup situation, they have Josh Dobbs. If Purdy got banged up, I do think Shanahan would definitely break out kind of a QB run-designed game plan for the week. Dobbs is just a very hot and cold quarterback. There was a stretch of 3 weeks where he looked like Justin Fields, where he was making some insane throws, some out-of-structure stuff. His athleticism's really nice, but his consistency as a passer is just all over the map. So I don't think he could step in and play really well. I think that is a big difference between a Brock Purdy and a Josh Dobbs. There's probably some haters out there that say, oh, Purdy does just fine here. I'm sure Dobbs would do just fine. That's ridiculous. No, it would look a lot different. And the upside would just be nowhere near what it is with Purdy. And their Super Bowl hopes are certainly out the door if Purdy did go down. But as we mentioned, we'll transition to the weapons here. It is a super team of weapons. And this group undoubtedly elevates Brock Purdy from a production standpoint. I think he's the 17th best quarterback in the league, but when he gets Kyle Shanahan and these dudes, where this graphic looks like a goddamn Madden Ultimate Team page with all these premium players, that is where Brock Purdy can basically put up MVP type of numbers. And this year, especially after bringing Brandon Ayuk back, it should be more of the same, right? And what I love about this is just how seamlessly all of these Tetris blocks, these puzzle pieces meld together from a skill set perspective to kind of complete this entire unit. And Brandon Ayuk's presence here was a critical part of that, because he's your number one wide receiver, your separator, your route runner, the guy when you go to your drop back passing game, this is your number one read. This is the guy you're counting on to win one-on-one matchups and to win tough catches. And especially what Ayuk brings to the table as a vertical deep threat is essential here, because everybody else here is busy kicking your ass, taking names in the short to intermediate game for the most part. So he plugs right back in as a legit alpha, do-it-all, number one wide receiver, somewhere between wide receivers 6 and 10 in the league, in my opinion. I would put him in a tier of true alpha wide receivers, but not quite into that elite tier maybe yet. Not quite ready to say he's in the same tier as Justin Jefferson and Tyreek Hill and A.J. Brown, but he is definitely a tier ahead of your Michael Pittmans and Calvin Ridleys or T. Higgins. And it's that overall completeness of his skill set that does make him an alpha, well worth the $30 million a year that he just got from the Niners. And then you've got Debo, part running back, part wide receiver, part Terminator. This dude is arguably the most badass wide receiver in the league on the football field, and I think has even become underrated. And underrated as an overall player, but his impact on this team has been underrated. You know, a lot of people were saying, oh, they're going to trade Debo and keep Ayuk and roll with Pearsall and Ayuk. I never took that stance, because what Debo brings to this Niners team is arguably even more difficult to replicate. And in the times where Debo wasn't available for this team, I think that was when the offense was at its worst. This team went on that weird stretch, weeks 6, 7, and 8, where they lost 3 straight games right in the middle of the season. Guess who wasn't there for those games? Deebo Samuel. In that Packers game as well, he got hurt on like the first drive of the game. They actually didn't light up Joe Barry's defense. And for Debo, like, yes, he can win down the field. He can run routes. He can win tough catches. People hate on him because he does have some frustrating drops. It's a drawback on Deebo Samuel, don't get me wrong. But the easy buttons that he creates for this offense, to just throw him a bubble screen on 2nd and 8, and the fact that he is so consistently going to make a defender or 3 miss. And if he doesn't, he'll meet a guy 2 yards short of the sticks and bully through that dude to make sure they get the first down, to get a fresh set of chains. Not to mention the fact that he can just go yard with some of these. He has these catch and run plays where he is rare speed with the ball in his hands. Doesn't always make sense. He's not the fastest, most electric route runner, but once he gets that ball in his hands, you are not catching Deebo Samuel from behind. And then the schematic flexibility that he brings to the table too, where they'll put him in the backfield and do some of that crazy stuff. It's tough to really put a finger on the impact that has on the game, but I think you really do feel it when he's not in there, because you can't do all the kind of crazy flex stuff that you can do with Christian McCaffrey and Debo in there together. So I think he's just as non-negotiable to make this whole thing work than Brandon Ayuk, but it is the combination of those two guys and those two skill sets that make this thing so dynamic. We'll come back to Juwan Jennings, but I think next we have to talk about Christian McCaffrey as we kind of go down the pecking order of things here. And obviously a very well-documented football player. You don't probably need me to tell you who Christian McCaffrey is and why he's so special, but you know, the best running back in the NFL and the best receiving back in the NFL all in one. And what an acquisition this has been. And, I think the fact that, some teams have their receiving back, they have their early downs back. The fact that you have the best of both of those guys in one player adds an unpredictable aspect to this offense that is also underrated. But yes, him as a football player, insane speed, insane vision. He's more powerful than I think he's ever been, but than anybody at 205 pounds or whatever he plays at should be. The agility to change lanes and make guys miss. I mean, he's just stupid, man. Was rightfully in the Offensive Player of the Year race last year and going number one in everybody's fantasy drafts for the most part for very, very good reason, right? Really no reason to believe that he won't repeat something close to what he did last year, as long as he's healthy. And then you have George Kittle, who... You know what? I debated putting the crown on him as the best tight end in the NFL right now. I can't quite do that to Travis Kelce, but I will hold the take that at least during the regular season, I expect George Kittle to be the best tight end in the NFL. Because I do think Kelce's kind of on that late Tim Duncan Spurs trajectory where they're just kind of keep him fresh for the playoffs. George Kittle's not quite in that stage of his career. And man, like there are weeks where George Kittle is just an afterthought, where they don't quite have the plays and the volume to get to George. But the fact that he is so happy and willing to just be this psychotic best blocking tight end in the NFL that he is, he understands the value he brings to the table as a blocker, and he's more than willing to just help this team win in whatever ways he needs to, is such a luxury for this team. But at any given moment when they need him, he can turn it on and just be this elite playmaker. And he really is the complete package as a receiving tight end as well. He runs routes. He's got crazy speed. He wins tough catches. And most notably, his ability after the catch is, to me, still the best in the league at the position, though David Njoku might be coming for that. But Njoku doesn't have everything else that we described with George Kittle. So the fact that he's here is just like an afterthought, making $15 million a year as a $12 million cap hit this year, is potentially the most underrated asset on this entire Niners team. Although that might be our next guy here, Jauan Jennings. I love Jauan Jennings, and he's built up kind of like a cult following lore within this Niners team. And they had to kind of pay him to bring him back. 2 years, $16 million. Probably could have gotten maybe even a little bit more elsewhere. But he's a tough guy to rank because, he had 376 yards last year. Just doesn't see the ball too much. And his role is just so limited that it's hard to say like anywhere else he's like a good quality starter. But here, like you literally could not pick a better fifth piece for this, group of five weapons. Because we already talked about how they don't often get to George Kittle in their game plan. They don't always have enough targets to get to number 4 in this offense. So number 5 almost has to be a dude that has no ego, couldn't care less if he gets 0 targets every single week, but is also going to block his ass off, stay physical, play a specific role for the offense that still provides usefulness, but also just being available and being efficient when they do need him. And that's just Jauan Jennings, man. Like they basically just run him on, they will run him on dig routes. He's a good dig route runner. He's tough to catch balls over the middle of the field. He's got this lengthy, big 6'3" frame. He goes and attacks the football knowing he's going to get hit. He's like really good at that route. And then they basically just have him run spot routes, hang out in the flat, stick routes, like just kind of as a check down really in a lot of their plays. And he's a guy that if Purdy gets in a pinch, he can throw the ball to him 3 yards short of the sticks. And Jauan Jennings coming out, and since he's been in San Francisco, he's a really shifty, awkward player to tackle. And he's got great instincts to get you whatever you need after the catch to keep the chains alive. He is a very underrated pain in the ass for teams to deal with, because you cannot factor him into your game planning at all. You are way too busy worrying about the rest of these guys. And Juwan Jennings is almost always just going to be that thorn in your side. So he's a very straight up dangerous player within the confines of this offense. And I like that they were able to get him back, because it was a threat that they were going to lose him. So that just rounds out an absurd group of weapons. We do have some depth pieces to talk about, though. So you have your first round pick in Ricky Pearsall, and it's kind of strange. I thought almost certainly when they drafted Ricky Pearsall that they were going to let Ayuk go, because as we've described these roles, Ricky Pearsall's skill set screamed Brandon Ayuk to me. Very similar size, speed, route running ability. Kind of reminds me of a young Brandon Ayuk. He definitely fills that role within this offense. And maybe they thought they could convince Ayuk to just relax and play on the last year of his deal, ride it out for a year, and then transfer over to Ricky Pearsall. But when it came down to it, this team really did not want to take that step back, knowing how special this team is this year and how this window is starting to close. So it does make things interesting for Ricky. I am curious to see where this goes. People keep saying they're going to trade Debo and hand it over to Pearsall. I'm not so sure about that for the reasons we've described. We'll see where this kind of goes for Ricky Pearsall. I don't love this opportunity for him anymore. I loved him as a guy that could overtake Ayuk in that role within a year. But now he just kind of settles in as a backup wide receiver. Now, I joked, like, maybe the Niners regret extending Ayuk after they saw Ricky Pearsall take a bullet in the chest and then walk himself to the hospital. Like, he's got a little bit of that dog in him. And I'm a big Ricky Pearsall fan. You know, some people thought it was early when he went at the end of the first round. I really didn't. He was, I think, my 33rd overall player in this draft class. He goes 31, so it kind of made sense to me. Very complete wide receiver, but I don't necessarily know where this goes with him on the Niners. The opportunities are going to be very, very, very limited. Very nice depth to have, though, for the Niners, especially if Ayuk goes down. I do think Pearsall would be prepared to step up. He's been injured for the majority of this camp, and then, of course, he just got shot, so might take a few weeks for him to be available for this team, but it sounds like he's going to be mostly good to go for this season. You got Chris Conley, journeyman veteran, and then a pair of day 3 draft picks over the last couple of years. Ronnie Bell out of Michigan. Okay, possession wide receiver. He had an absurd stat line last year. 6 catches, 3 touchdowns. All this dude does is score touchdowns, I guess. Not expecting that to continue, but could be decent depth for the long haul. And then Jacob Cowing, speedster, deep threat type. Very small, doesn't have the best hands. I think 4th round was about right for him, but maybe can get involved as a return man a little bit and eventually emerge as a maybe design deep threat type for this team. And then they also did pick up Terrace Marshall from the Panthers on the practice squad. Just a player worth noting. More of a name than anything at this point, but still young with some physical tools. At tight end, Eric Saubert gets brought in as the backup. He's basically here just to block. That's fine. He's been an okay blocker throughout his career. Jake Tongas hasn't played yet. You do have Kyle Juszczyk. It's getting harder and harder to find targets for him in the receiving game, but I think he had 17 catches on 20 targets last year. Still a guy that gets in their 21 personnel and can be a nuisance at times. And then the backup running backs, you're not expecting to play a whole lot, especially in the receiving game, but all these guys are essentially unproven through the air. Jordan Mason, Garendo, and Taylor. So that does wrap up this group of weapons. They are tied for a first for weapons. If I had to pick between this group and the Dolphins, who we also had in this tier, I think I'm leaning Niners, but, you know, Tyreek Hill is something special. But you're splitting hairs there. Both these groups of weapons are just absurd. But then at running back, they also come in first. We've talked about Christian McCaffrey. I feel like I already kind of broke him down as the receiving threat that he is. I don't want to get overly redundant here, but it is definitely worth pointing out that the Niners, for the running back ranking, do come in alone for first. And we've been talking throughout this series, like, locking McCaffrey in as number one with all these other guys like duking it out. Who's going to be the second best running back in the league? But I think Christian clearly has that crown right now. And it's been fun to see him get fully unlocked here. I don't know that he's necessarily better than he was in Carolina, but I have, eaten my words, and I was wrong. Back when he was in Carolina, I questioned his kind of overall power and contact balance and ability to break tackles. No, this dude, he's got the power aspect. Even if he is lighter, his overall strength relative to his size is probably the most underrated thing about Christian McCaffrey, because we know the speed, the vision, the receiving ability is all there, but his ability to be a between the tackles threat, to have great vision and power in that regard as well, is what puts this whole thing together. So he's the best back in the league, probably has a few years left at that. They just gave him a big contract extension, and I can't really argue with it. In this era of don't pay running backs, I think we all agree, pay Christian McCaffrey, and the Niners did. Now, they did lose Elijah Mitchell, which I think was nice, established depth. Mitchell has just really had a hard time staying healthy, and it feels like at this point that might be it for him, unfortunately. But I am excited for both Jordan Mason and Isaac Guerendo to get more of an opportunity there. Jordan Mason has been around here. He's been absurdly efficient when he's played. He hasn't gotten a lot of touches, but in the first 2 years of his career, he does have 476 yards on 85 attempts. That's 5.6 per. But it's been mostly in kind of, grinded out, games over type of workload where it's hard to kind of gauge how much the defense is trying and how much that really matters. Came into the league undrafted in 2022, big-bodied Georgia Tech back, kind of for the first time gets this RB2 job really to himself. And I think he can definitely be a straight-line bruising backup to Christian McCaffrey and prove to be good in that role. I highly doubt he's going to emerge as like some star back that is eventually brought in to be a starter elsewhere. But within the role, I think he can definitely emerge as that. He's just, in my mind, still pretty unproven. And then you do have Isaac Guerendo. Should see some more touches for him now with Mitchell done for the year. The pro comp on him was Raheem Mostert, so it made so much sense when the Niners took him. He is that speed train runner, rare traits, 6 foot, 220 pounds, was really good running wide zone at Louisville, but there were some holdups on him. He was never a starting back. He had to transfer out of Wisconsin, goes to Louisville, and even then he couldn't beat out a 5'10", 190-pound slow Jawar Jordan. And when you watch him on tape, there is some hesitation. I don't love his acceleration to hit the hole. I love him on outside zone, but if you want to run him in a variety of different runs, I need to see that vision and anticipation as a runner and ability to just commit quickly tick up. But it's a good spot for him to learn and to kind of come in and just, get some wide zone touches, which he is good at, provide some potential explosive plays when he is in there. If Isaac Guerendo has 30 touches for 180 yards and 2 touchdowns this year, I wouldn't be all that surprised because he is that explosive. And then they have another kind of big goal line type in Patrick Taylor, who they brought in from Green Bay. So it's unproven in terms of depth, but I do have the arrow pointing up on both Jordan Mason and Isaac Guerendo. And then Brock Purdy, I do give a slight boost for the run multiplier. They will mix in some read options. Again, he's an underrated athlete, but also what he brings to the table as an awesome play-action boot threat and the ability to throw on the move. They do hold that backside end when they run outside zone because Purdy is good at getting on the move. And he's really good in the RPO game, which does factor into the overall run game. So I wanted to give him a slight boost. It's nothing major, but this isn't like Kirk Cousins or Aaron Rodgers where there's just no factor on the run game at all. You know what I'm saying? So 15th to 24th in the league for the QB run multiplier. And then if they did have to go to Josh Dobbs, I definitely think this would be an offense built around read options and stuff. Kind of get the old Trey Lance playbook out, if you will, for Josh Dobbs. But now it's been obviously a very positive conversation to this point in the episode. The offensive line is, I think, what is going to make or break this Niners season. This is their potential Achilles heel, and I think everybody knows it. They rank 32nd for me, dead last in the NFL for pass blocking. They are much better for run blocking, 13th in the league, but that does still leave them 29th to 30th for overall offensive line ranking. And with that dead last ranking for pass blocking, it is tough because this system does protect these guys. Early downs, they lean into play action, RPOs, getting the ball out quickly. And when you run play action, you're forcing teams, for the most part, to defend you horizontally, defend you as if you're going to run the ball. And when you have a run game as good as they do, you have to respect that. So they're oftentimes able to dictate to the other team that this is how things are going to go, and you're going to be defending the run, not getting upfield, and not threatening our guys as pass protectors where they aren't as good. So when they're able to stay within their game script, they can dodge this issue very well. But once they get into a drop back pass situation, this was a problem for them last year, and it could be even worse this year. With the exception of Trent Williams, this is a paper wall in front of Brock Purdy when it's 3rd and 9 and they need to buy some time to throw. It's almost like hit the top of your drop and let it go. And fortunately, Purdy has a little bit of that Tua Tagovailoa in him where he can do that, but it's just not a world you really want to live in, especially once you get into, late game situations against Patrick Mahomes or any of the other great quarterbacks that they could run into. But let's go through this group individually. You got Trent Williams at left tackle, the best tackle in the league, one of the 5 best players in the league. And I had a little fun through that 100 run blocking grade on him because he is maybe 2 tiers higher than any other run blocking offensive lineman in the league still at 36 years old. And he is really entering, I feel like you have your Hall of Famers, you got your first ballot Hall of Famers, and then you have like a crop above that, your Tom Brady's, your Jerry Rice's, your Randy Moss's, that are just genuinely some of the greatest football players of all time. I really think with the level he's playing at this late in his career, and he wants a contract extension, we don't know when this is going to slow down. He is putting himself into that conversation. And I just frankly don't understand it. His tape is hilarious. He moves like a running back. His ability to open up, get on the move, find these linebackers and safeties at the next level, his speed to do so. If you didn't know any better, you would have no freaking idea that this was the oldest or one of the oldest offensive linemen playing in the league. You would think this is some 23-year-old that just got picked number 1 overall in the draft. So he has all the traits, and obviously from a technique standpoint, there's just nothing really left to teach him. If there's like anything to say about him, it's that there's maybe a few other better pass protectors in the league, but not many. Like he's top 5 as a pass protector and top 1 as a run blocker. So he's unbelievable. And basically him and the best group in the league in terms of skill player blockers, from George Kittle to Kyle Juszczyk to Ayuk to Jawan Jennings. Basically, those 2 guys alone and effectively nobody else here still makes them a top half run blocking unit in the NFL. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up, but that's because Trent Williams is just that good. They just get behind him and know that he's going to move people out of the way, sometimes make other people's blocks for them, and do it play in, play out, no matter what. So they are working on the contract. They'll get it taken care of. He signed that crazy 6-year, $140 million extension a few years ago. I'm pretty sure it's pretty flexible. It's just going to come down to them, like where they put the guarantees, where they align the cap, how many years into this thing are they going to be? Do they really want to pay him until he's 40? They're going to work some of that stuff out, but he's not going to miss the Jets game. I would be very, very surprised. So a lot of talk around him not playing this year. Especially after they paid Ayuk, they are all in at this point. So they'll get him out there, especially when this offensive line without him, you could find better O-lines in college after that. But beyond that, you got Aaron Banks at left guard. Just hasn't worked out. Has been one of those 49ers draft picks that I was critical of, and I was like, I thought that was way early. I'll give 49ers a little benefit of the doubt, but I don't see it. And he's just been really mediocre. Not that he totally sucks. He's got good play strength. He tries, but he gets crossed up in pass protection. He constantly misses his strikes as a run blocker, misses assignments. He's a kind of replacement level, low end, replacement level dude. Last year of his deal here, I imagine he's probably on the way out after this year. You got Jake Brendel at center. He's probably your second best player here. He's done a commendable job to hold down the fort as the center here since Alex Mack retired. But he's really light, under 300 pounds, and you isolate him in pass protection, he's about as bad as you could ask for a starting center. He just will go backwards, and he doesn't really have the latch strength in pass protection. But as a run blocker, he is nice. He's that kind of undersized move center that they can kind of use in a huge variety of ways as a run blocker, and he gets good leverage. He's got good get off. He tries. He's good in that phase. He contributes as well to this run blocking being really as good as it is, ranking 13th there. Then you got now a rookie in Dominique Puny at right guard. He's going to have to start because John Feliciano, who started the majority of their games last year at right guard, is currently on the IR designated for return. Probably going to miss the first 8 weeks or so of the season. 49ers fans are excited for Dominique Puny. They spent a third-round pick on him. Personally, I wanted to like him a lot more than I did end up liking him. Now, he did clear that there's a threshold for the 20-yard shuttle, and he cleared the 4.46 mark or whatever on it, and 70% of offensive linemen that have cleared that number have turned into pretty good NFL players at least. So he does have that working for him. Personally, based on the tape I saw on him at Kansas, I would bet on him being in the 25% of players that don't work out with that good shuttle number. I did not see the athleticism or the foot speed at all on tape. I thought he was a really poor pass protector. Decent first step, decent, even good college run blocker, but I don't know that he's going to come in and be dominant right away. This is much closer to how I felt about Aaron Banks, where I was like, man, that was 2 or 3 rounds earlier than I liked that guy. So it's not a horrible pick. I'll give him a chance. If I had to bet on it, they'll be going back to John Feliciano after the first couple of months, and Puny will kind of be in that Spencer Beerford range of developmental backup who's played in the past for this team. We'll see how that goes. With that, I do still have the up arrow on him. He's going to have a good opportunity here, and I didn't think he sucked as a prospect. I did have a 4th to a 5th round grade on him, but not a guy I was really excited to throw into the fire right away. And then Colton McKivitz at right tackle, who's on a 2-year, $4.6 million contract, basically getting paid nothing, and is, again, kind of a replacement level dude. He's played here. He's an okay athlete, an okay run blocker, but no play strength, not really good technique even, not great foot speed, not a good anchor. He's just not a starting caliber right tackle, man, and he is their starter. That rounds out their 5 starters. Then you got backups. Jalen Moore's been around here, hasn't really shown good play to this point. Spencer Beerford was a disaster last year. Good athlete, good run blocker, but the pass protection is just not playable right now. Nick Zakelj, just 6th round pick last year out of Fordham. If he was unknown, but if he was any good, he probably would have beat out Dominique Puny, in my opinion. Ben Barch, who was really bad in Jacksonville. It's brutal, man. They have to be in that game script. And if this team's going to lose in the playoffs, it's because someone found a way to stop the run, stop the early down stuff, get this team into 3rd and 8 situations where they have the playmakers and a quarterback that can get the ball out quickly, but man, their margin for error is non-existent with how much time they're able to protect, even if you have Trent Williams. So there is your kind of Achilles heel for an offense that does otherwise still grade out exceptionally well, even with the pass blocking concerns. 4th for overall offense in the league. I have them 8th for passing game, which is a testament to these weapons and Kyle Shanahan. the 16th ranked passing quarterback in the league, and the worst ranking pass protection to still be the 8th best offense in the league is pretty impressive. But 4th for overall run game, and this offense really should be ready to cook yet again this year. But next up, let's talk about this defense. There's a lot of talent on this side of the ball as well, starting with the defensive line, highlighted by Nick Bosa. This ranks as a top 3 defensive line for me, tied with the Cowboys for 2nd to 3rd pass rush in the league, and much lower for D-line run defense. They get a C grade there, which is 24th to 28th. So maybe another potential weakness on this team right there is a little squishiness in the middle. But it is worth noting this is one of those fronts we've talked about with the Jets and the Texans, where they do slant these guys. They don't necessarily ask these guys every single play to just play that traditional stack, peek, shed mentality. What they want to do is slant, cause chaos, shoot gaps, get into the backfield, lean into your athleticism, make it feel like you're running into a hurricane every single play, and then they lean on great linebackers on the back end to clean up the mess. So they have a style here that definitely works around having less capability from a stout run defense perspective, and this is overall just kind of by design. So do keep that in the back of your mind, but let's go through this group. You start with Nick Bosa. Not a ton to say here. He is in that elite tier, Defensive Player of the Year in 2022. And I think Bosa can sometimes get misunderstood. I think a lot of people think he's kind of a finesse guy. That is so far from the truth. Not that he doesn't have some different pass rush moves in his bag, but he doesn't really go to them that much, and he just might be the best power rusher in the NFL right now. He has an unbelievable first step, and he's just so good at that low man wins, inside man wins mentality. Fires off the ball, blows you up, builds his entire pass rush plan around putting that fear factor into you that you're going backwards. And then he does have different counters off of that. Just within the bull rush, he's really good at understanding where he's got you and giving you a pull here or ripping under you there, or just, chucking you aside, getting to the quarterback. But he's got inside-outside swipes. He's got a spin move in his bag. Doesn't need to break it out too much, but it is all in there. But, man, he is just relentless and is obviously the core reason why this team ranks out so high for defensive line, because he's one of these guys that he's a game wrecker in his own right, but you got to slide your lines. You got to slide your line his way. Oftentimes you got to keep a tight end to chip block in, keep that running back in to chip him, and many times it doesn't even matter because it's just so disruptive. But the Niners do have a legit high-end number 2 option opposite of Nick Bosa or next to Nick Bosa in Javon Hargrave. A bit of a one-dimensional defensive player. Now, he's a great fit in this system, right, because of what we described with these defensive tackles, where they ask these guys to penetrate. They don't need you to kind of play that disciplined stack, peek, shed technique, and Javon Hargrave has never really had much interest in doing that. He wants to splash into the backfield and make plays, and that's why it's such a fun fit for him in San Francisco, because they almost depend on him doing what he does as a run defender. And in that regard, you do see him get a fair share of defensive stops, but 3 or 4 times over, you can run into his gap. He will vacate his space. It's just a very polarizing play style he plays with in that regard. So I do still call him a bit of a one-dimensional player, even if he fits the scheme from a run defense standpoint. But as a pass rusher, also the perfect fit here. We talked earlier about how this team loves to run stunts. They want that disruptive 3 technique that can blow up both the guard and the tackle and open up these rush lanes for a linebacker or an edge player to loop in. Javon Hargrave is an absolute handful off the snap. One of the best first steps among defensive tackles, some of the best overall just power, play strength. And then he does have some counters and some finesse that he will break out when he's in more of a one-on-one pass rush situation. He can beat you with an inside-out swim. He understands when he's got you with his power and how to deconstruct and get after the quarterback. So they really handpicked him as a fit for their scheme in free agency last year. I would say That proved correct in his first year as a Niner. He was 8th among interior defensive linemen in total pressures and is absolutely more than capable as a number 2 complement to Nick Bosa. But let's kick things back out to the edge with Leonard Floyd, who they bring in from Buffalo. Definitely one of these guys that got overrated by Bills fans and maybe some portions of, just football fans at large, because he was one of these guys that had a high percentage of sack totals last year. And I do think he's a guy that when he wins, he's got that speed and pursuit and balance to finish sacks. But, my stance on Leonard Floyd hasn't really changed, even though he had a double-digit sack season. He's a cleanup man. He's a speed threat around the edge. He's a perfect fit for this system, for those stunts, right? If they want that bendy, explosive, loopy stunt man, where if you've got Malik Collins or Javon Hargrave blowing up both the tackle and the guard, opening up that rush lane, Floyd will get in, and as we just said, he will finish. So I think that's really why they pinpointed him. But, he was 80th out of 118 eligible players in pass rush win rate last year, 66th out of 121 in PFF pass rush grade, which I do think is one of their more stable grades. And his contract within the NFL kind of backs that up. He's a capable number 2. I think he's an okay run defender as well. Even within this system, might put up another double-digit sack season because of the schemed-up production, but not a huge difference maker. But I do see the fit, and I think from an overall effort and availability standpoint, Leonard Floyd for 2 years, 20 was a better decision for the Niners than Chase Young back on a 1-year, $15 million deal. So, as a compliment to Hargrave and Bosa, you're fine with it. And then you have Malik Collins is the last starter here. Nice signing from Houston. And he definitely didn't get nothing. He got 2 years, $24 million. Has always been a pretty nice starter. He's bounced around the league, but had a bit of a career year last year in Houston in this exact same system under DeMeco Ryans. 48 pressures, 7 sacks. Really disruptive player. Rocked up, can get off the ball, cause some disruption. They know what they want with this front. So I do like that signing. He had the play of the preseason where he disposed of 2 offensive players and then stopped the back at the line of scrimmage. It kind of went viral. That's not him for the most part. He's been more like Javon Hargrave, that disruptive kind of pin your ears back type of overall player, whether that's as a pass rusher or a run defender. But good to know that ability's in there. And that's kind of your starting 4. And then there's one other guy that I do think is going to be a bit of a rotational starter, and that's Yetur Gross-Matos. They are definitely a thinner defensive line than they've been in years past. But, Gross-Matos got 2 years, $9 million, I think. That sounds about right. He's a capable rotational third. Good athlete, good effort, just really not a lot of pass rush plan or high-end consistency as a run defender. But, he's a versatile kind of do-it-all player that I think will rotate, probably play 500, 600 snaps as their third edge off the bench. And then we'll just keep going down the edge pecking order before we do the interior D-line depth. You have Drake Jackson, 2nd-round pick a year ago. They clearly do not believe in either him or his ability to stay healthy, or both. Talented player coming out of USC, very strong guy relative to his size. Never really had too much of a pass rush plan, but had some speed and bendiness. Kind of a nice 2nd-round pick, in my opinion, when they made it. But again, he just has not been available for this team. He's on the PUP list currently. I still think if he could get out healthy, the arrows could be pointing up. I think it's just a really good scheme fit for him. He's got the theoretical explosiveness to be the disruptor, if you want to loop that defensive tackle around you. But he also has the speed and bendiness to be that looper himself. So for all the stunts, at least, I think he could be a fit if he could get healthy. We'll see what they get from him this year, though. And then Robert Beal, very speedy run defense forward, rotational player out of Georgia. Might have to play a decent amount of snaps this year, at least until Drake Jackson's healthy. And then for interior defensive line depth, you still have Kevin Givens. Decent enough backup, undersized, not the best run defender, but good athlete, decent player. And then they signed Jordan Elliott. I don't really know why. I don't know why the NFL is so obsessed with him. He went like third round. I thought he was horrible coming out. He's been horrible for the Browns. He has some decent athleticism as a rusher. He's had some highlight wins throughout his time in Cleveland, but that's really it. I mean, he is going nowhere other than backwards as a run defender. And even then, he can't really disengage and make plays either. So for him to be your next best defensive tackle after Kevin Givens, a guy that is going to have to play here because Kalia Davis is the only other guy on the roster, and he also is on the IR designated for return. You know, my advice to NFL teams is when Jordan Elliott's out there, run duo right at him and see what they can do about it. It's not my favorite depth piece to have there. And then Kalia Davis, he just hasn't been able to stay healthy going back to his college career. He's got talent, but can't expect anything there. So I don't love the interior D-line depth. The edge depth I think is solid, but obviously the starting four is awesome. You've got a true one, you've got a true two, and then you have really nice complementary guys for what they're being asked to do here with Leonard Floyd and Malik Collins. So these guys are going to get after it, and they're all kind of the perfect fit for this scheme too. So there's your D-line. And then the linebackers, and I think the best way that I can describe how I feel about Fred Warner is even with Dre Greenlaw expected to miss about the first half, if not more, of this season. He tore his Achilles in the Super Bowl, and then you don't know what Dre Greenlaw is going to be when he comes back. Even with that injury and bringing in a kind of declining Devondre Campbell, I still have the Niners ranked first at linebacker because I think that highly of Fred Warner. And it's not that Campbell sucks, but to me, he is clearly the best linebacker in the NFL. Ravens fans, I'm not trying to take a shot at Roquan. It's just Fred's just a little bit of a step up in terms of the all-around game. I think his coverage feel is one of one. It's a guy that played some safety going back to his early days at BYU. You know, our friend James Foster sent out that clip about Luke Kuechly coverage tape and how unbelievable it was. His ability to just morph around the middle of the defense as if we like to think we do in Madden when we use our middle linebackers. I watched that clip of Luke Kuechly, and Kuechly himself was one of one, but Fred Warner is the only guy in the league right now that I think is somewhat close to that. Now, he's not quite as fast as Kuechly was, but that kind of eye in the back of his head / overall IQ to just know where teams are trying to attack him from. He understands route concepts, so like he'll peel off his coverage and collapse down and make plays on the ball, frustrating quarterbacks in that way. And then as a run defender, he's just a little bit bigger than someone like Roquan too. And again, this is not an anti-Roquan spiel, but if this is the debate between him and Roquan, it's just not in my mind. Fred just has more length and maybe even a little bit better overall instincts to find the football. He's even an awesome blitzing threat when they want to ask that out of him too. So yeah, Fred gets the crown for me. Ravens fans can complain about it. Roquan is easily LB2. Both those guys are elite. But after watching the film on both these guys, it was quite clear to me. But then, yeah, you open up some questions at LB2. I'm very familiar with Devondre Campbell as a Packers fan. He is a lengthy, rangy, instinctive coverage player that I think is slowing down a little bit. Opposite side of 30 now. He's a guy that I think you'd question the durability concerns a little bit as well. And as a run defender, he's just very passive. You could say that was Joe Barry's system, but that's kind of been him throughout his career. He's not this guy that's like super dialed into his keys and like taking risks and like shooting gaps and making these incredible plays at and behind the line of scrimmage. He's going to kind of let the run come to him. He's not like great at getting off blocks. He's a pretty secure tackler, though, and gives you a decent enough floor as a run defender, but he's nowhere near what Dre Greenlaw is in that phase. I think as a coverage player, you can get something close to what Dre Greenlaw gives you until he comes back. So that's where you see the Niners are still number one for linebacker coverage, and then they are a little bit lower for linebacker run defense than where they would be with Greenlaw. And the hope with Greenlaw is just that he can come back something close to 100%. It's going to be tough, man. This isn't quite like what we've talked about with Kirk Cousins and Aaron Rodgers, where it's their arm and their mind that are the most important things at their position. At linebacker, that explosiveness, that first step is a big deal. So how much can he get back there playing at his speed? It's hard to imagine that he's going to be like as good as he was last year. But it's hard to rule that out either with modern sports science and all that stuff. Very much up in the air. But when Dre Greenlaw is out there, he is the best number 2 linebacker in the league. Probably still a top 10 overall linebacker. Just a hyper-balanced player. Like, I would say Greenlaw is like an 8 out of 10 in pretty much every single category. Size, speed, coverage feel, tackling, take-on ability, whatever it might be. Kind of the perfect LB2 in that way. So I suppose it makes him a little bit of a wild card for some of the upside aspect of this defense. If he can get back in the second half of the year and look like the old Dre Greenlaw, this team really has that unique asset that really they have and nobody else has. Again, they're already number 1 for linebacker, but if you get a peak Dre Greenlaw in there, there's really no team in the league that sniffs what these guys can do in the middle of this defense in both phases of the game. And now it's not that they aren't great there. It's just maybe a little less unique without a healthy Greenlaw. And then they have some interesting depth. Demetrius Flanagan-Fowles is kind of a converted safety that's been in development here. He plays a little bit as a weak side backer with some speed. Loved D. Winters to this team. I think if Devondre Campbell goes down, which is very much possible, by the way, he's had a lot of durability issues as of late. I would be interested to see D. Winters in year 2. I liked his stuff at TCU. He was just really sporadic, but kind of Dre Greenlaw-esque in terms of the overall traits. And when it looked good for D. Winters, it looked like some of the nice explosive plays that Dre Greenlaw can make. They do have Curtis Robinson. He's been around for a little bit here. And then they spent a 7th-round pick on Tatum Bethune, who's more of a sort of undersized, not super traitsy, but kind of scrappy, quick. Like, he had fun tape, but you didn't walk away feeling like super confident that he was ever going to be a starter. But as a scrappy special teamer and maybe an emergency backup, sure, why not in the 7th round? But you got Fred Warner and a decent number 2 in Devondre Campbell. They're going to be more than fine at linebacker. It's more like, can they be 2 tiers and 2 steps ahead of everybody else at this position group? Like we talk about having an elite tight end in fantasy football or having an elite catcher in fantasy baseball being like something that's really hard to get and unique that other teams can't have on you. It's kind of like that element with the Niners. When Greenlaw and Warner are out there healthy, they're just able to make the middle of the field in coverage unavailable to teams in a way that really nobody else can. And as we mentioned, they ask a lot for these guys to be able to clean up in the mud with that unique front 4 and the style that they play with. I don't think Devondre Campbell's going to be as good in that type of system as Dre Greenlaw is. So definitely a bit of a wild card for at least some aspects of how this defense is going to play this year. But then you got the secondary. It's another one of these units that comes in that like big cluster of solid units in the middle of the league. They rank 10th to 18th. Got some good pieces and got some question marks. Now, you do have a true number 1 star corner in Charvarius Ward, who is just honestly underrated. So physical, one of the best press corners in the league, and a really high IQ zone corner as well. He's got ball skills. He's got plenty of speed to protect over the top. He was a good player when they signed him from Kansas City, but he's continued to get better and is, in my opinion, quite clearly a top 10 corner in the NFL at this point. He had one of the best corner seasons in the league last year. So you absolutely do not have any questions about him. He's a rock. But you do open up some questions beyond that. Isaac Yedem wins the cornerback 2 job kind of over Renardo Green, really. Ambry Thomas is hurt, and they bring in Rock Ya-Sin as depth. But Yadam's tough to know what you're going to get. Amazing year last year. Talk about one of the best corners in the league last year. He really did break out. He had like 11 pass breakups within that Saints system that asked those guys to play a lot of man coverage. He didn't give much up. But how much do you weigh that versus the other 7 years of his career where he's bounced all over the place and it's not like he just wasn't playing. Like, he has played in a variety of different stops and been horrible. So he's the definition of a up and down yellow arrow type of player. I give him a solid 76 grade as a capable number 2 corner, but that is lower than how he played last year, but way better than how he's shown the rest of his career. And honestly, the league wasn't super impressed. 1 year, $2 million deal for Isaac Yiadom here for the Niners. It's not to say the league isn't wrong, though, and that the Niners might have found one of the signings of the offseason here in Isaac Yiadom. It's going to be a very interesting player to monitor and is, I would say, at least maybe the biggest wild card for this defense and certainly this secondary. Now, you do have Diamador Lenore in the slot. I really like him, and I definitely put the up arrow on him. This feels like the first season where he's entering the year as their solidified starter in the slot. He came into the league as an off-zone, kind of quarters-heavy outside corner, really heady player, and is kind of learned and crafted his own game as a slot player. But as the year went on, he was really good, making plays on the ball, really establishing himself as a physical run defender from this position, because they do ask a lot from their slot corner. They want to live in 4-2. They need a guy that can come in and get off blocks and make tackles. He plays at 5'10", 200 pounds, so he's bigger and stronger than I remember him at Oregon. I don't know if he's beefed up or it's just because they played him as an off-zone outside corner that you didn't see it as much, but I definitely think you feel really good about him, and he might even kind of break out as one of these top 5 or so true slot corners now that he's kind of found a home there. Because even last year, the first half of the year, he was playing on the outside. But he also has the flexibility to step outside too if need be. I don't think he was horrible out there. But as you continue to go down the cornerback pecking order, they did spend a second-round pick on Renardo Green, and I think he's a really nice insurance policy. If Isaac Yiadom goes out there the first 6 weeks and this isn't a fit and last year was a fluke and you need to bench him, which I definitely think is possible, Renardo Green should step in as a really good fit. And this made so much sense when the Niners took him. His tape screamed Shavarius Ward, where he's lengthy, he's physical, he loves to press, definitely a little grabby at times, but you'll live with that. And the Niners even asked their guys to be like that at times. Really made sense. So it's Yiadom's job for now. We'll see how that goes. Either way, Green is probably the corner of the future, because if Yiadom is good, he will get paid next offseason, and the money in the banana stand has to run out eventually, so he should be starting by next year. Definitely a guy I put the up arrow on and was a nice pick at the end of the second round. Rock Ya-Sin is decent veteran backup in an emergency situation. Darrell Luter hasn't gotten a chance to play too much here, but was a fascinating enough 5th round pick. I think they maybe were hoping he could emerge as a slot guy for them. I want to say he got hurt last year and has just kind of fallen by the wayside with Lenore emerging, but maybe someone to keep an eye on. And then Ambry Thomas is designated for return. Hard to say really how he fits into the picture now after all these different additions. He's been like an okay-ish starter for them last year of his deal. Wouldn't be horribly surprised if when he is healthy, if they like this room, if they just kind of let him go. But we'll see. And then the safety group, they have a type, man. All these dudes are stocky smashers with instincts at the position, and I love it. We'll start with Talanoa Hufanga, getting back healthy here. Now, do I think Hufanga got a little bit overrated early on because he got a bunch of picks, some of which certainly fell into his lap, and he has the aesthetic of Troy Polamalu? Yes. Like, he comes into the league and makes first-team All-Pro as a rookie. Do I think he will sustain that hype? Not really. Like, I don't think he's this amazing coverage player. He has instincts. He can read the quarterback's eyes. He'll jump routes. And because of that, he will have pretty good ball production. But down-to-down coverage ability, does he have the oiliest hips or the best speed or the best range to be this dominant, consistent coverage safety to live up to year-to-year all-pro hype. No, I stopped short of that, but he's a really good player. I do love his instincts. I think he's super smart. He loves to come down and defend the run, and they're going to be more than happy to have him back this year. I'm not trying to talk trash about him, but I do definitely think some pump the brakes are necessary from some people on Hufanga. Does not mean he isn't a really good player, though, right? And then Jair Brown is exactly in that mold. He's not quite as big, but, didn't run that fast. Really not the most consistent overall coverage player, but splashes nice plays in coverage. He's kind of a turnover machine, just like Hufanga. A nose for the football, loves to hit. This dude thinks he's Cam Chancellor, I think, but he's half the size. He's a nice player, and I don't see him really forfeiting this job anytime soon. I think the arrow is only pointing up on him. Even if you don't have great speed and range, by the way, the more you play, especially in a quarters-heavy system, the more you play, the more you see, the more you learn, the better, more consistent coverage player you're going to get, because communication and ability to see stuff and jump routes and have anticipation is half the battle on the back end. So it is a very nice safety duo, though I don't think they're like huge difference makers at the end of the day. I will say, though, I am so freaking high on Malik Mustafa. He was my number one safety in this draft, or at least tied with Tyke Smith. And all these safeties coming out have different styles and preferences, so it's not as relevant maybe as other positions. But from a raw grade perspective, he was tied for the highest grade among safeties in this draft. I had him as kind of a top 50 player in this draft, and the Niners get him in the 4th round. It's like, here we go again. And I think Malik Mustafa is a better version of Talanoa Hufanga. And I'm going to say it, and I'm going to say it with the conviction that 2 years from now, Malik Mustafa will be the best safety on this defense. Probably not going to happen this year, because I don't think Brown loses this job. As long as Hufanga's healthy, I don't think he loses this job. So Mustafa's just going to be on this team as a just tenacious special teamer. This dude is fast and loves to hit. Like, if he forces 2 fumbles this year on kickoffs with the new rules, would not be the least bit surprised. But there's guys that are big and fast and love to hit in every draft. Mustafa actually had like coverage feel back there. I loved his eyes. Was really good from 2-shell defenses, which is going to be a lot of the coverage structures here for the Niners. Pretty good speed and range for such a big guy. And that speed and range matters too, by the way, when you're coming downfield trying to cover ground in a hurry. And he's just faster than both Brown and Hufanga, a good bit faster. So I don't know when his playing time opportunity comes. I do know that if one of these guys goes down and Mustafa is asked to start, I would bet on whoever gets hurt not getting that job back. And that includes Talanoa Hufanga. If Brown's playing well enough that they don't want to bench him and Mustafa comes in and is balling out, Hufanga misses a month, I think it might go that far. And, the Hufanga truthers are going to say you're crazy, but we'll see how this goes. I think he's super, super talented. So I'm excited to see him out there. And then George Odom's been a nice kind of journeyman veteran that kind of fits the mold of, stocky safeties that love to hit. Overall, I think it's a really nice secondary. You have one difference maker in Shavarius Ward, and then a pretty high floor with the rest of these players. We'll see what you get from Isaac Yiadom. I think if he's as good as he was last year, you are talking about a top 10 secondary. It's just hard to know necessarily what you're getting there from him. And then Renardo Green as a backup plan isn't too shabby either. So you round out this defense. They come out as my 3rd overall defense, very high there as well. 3rd in pass defense, where they're effectively foolproof. Not really any holes in that regard. And your linebacker questions aren't nearly as present as they are with the run defense on Devondre Campbell, who I do think is a better coverage player. And then from a run defense perspective, they come in 17th, which is about where they were last year. Even though the style that they play with their slants and games up front with these guys does protect them and allows them to have such light, aggressive defensive tackles, smart teams with good offensive lines can get these guys. And we've seen that. So they're not foolproof in terms of run defense, but analytically speaking, you're just fine if you're a top 24 run defense in the league. Just don't be getting gashed for 5 yards a carry. And if you have a great pass defense like the Niners do, that frankly could be even better if some of the pieces in the secondary take a step forward, this really could be as much as the best defense in the league to complement what we already saw was an exceptional offense. And then in terms of special teams, they're also top 10. Jake Moody in his rookie year last year had his ups and downs, but finished strong and was pretty clutch towards the end. So you feel pretty good about his trajectory. Mitch Wishnowsky is a pretty good punter. I had to do it. It might have been cringe, but I had the opportunity to have Monsters, Inc. references in back-to-back deep dives, so I'm going to take it. For some reason, though, the DVOA team grade on them last year was 25th, and we're just kind of going with the more objective metrics for our special teams formula here. So that definitely dragged them down a little bit. They were second in PFF team grade. Someone else can explain why they're so different there, because for the most part, these have been pretty tight between PFF and DVOA being on the same page. But definitely more of a strength than it is a weakness in terms of special teams. As you look at the Venn diagram of strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors, the strengths really speak for themselves. They really have elite players, like truly elite players, like best in class type of players at every position group, other than maybe secondary and quarterback. But in terms of weaknesses, even if they do have the best left tackle in the NFL, the offensive line is a weakness for this team. And especially in drop back passing situations, I still think that is the one weak link for the Niners. When you play the Niners, play base defense, load up the box, stop the run, get them to 3rd and 8. And if you can do that, if you can get this team into a drop back passing situation, this offense has a vulnerability. And when you're talking about divisional round playoffs, conference championships, Super Bowl, that's what you're looking for. You're looking for matchup advantages and weaknesses. And unfortunately for the Niners, they do have one very clear weakness that is probably the difference between this team and our remaining 2 teams in terms of having a real red flag weakness. The other thing is the D-line depth really isn't what it's been in its time for the Niners. If they do get an injury to one of those starters, I would start to have my worries, and God forbid that's Nick Bosa. Would not wish that on this team, but I do think some of these other playoff contenders have better depth on their defensive line than the Niners. And then the pivotal wild card factors that could kind of be the difference between this team being the number 3 team this year and the number 1 team, which is what they're ultimately striving for. We've hit on these, but it's Dre Greenlaw at that LB2 spot. If he returns, then when he returns, and how well is he when he does return? They're going to be just fine at linebacker, but as we said, they have a unique strength when he's out there. And then the secondary. The secondary is not a weakness, but there are some unproven-ish aspects in that group. What is Isaac Yiadom? What is Renardo Green? Jair Brown in year 2. Can Diamador Lenore emerge as a top 5 slot corner in the league after really only playing that position for 10 games or so? Again, I like the floor, but the upside is there for them to be more of a top 7 to 10 secondary. I do believe that. And then I'll circle back to where we started too with this new look defensive coaching staff. Can this really trio of Staley, Sorensen, and Kachurik be a really nice defensive staff as well? I think there's upside in all of those areas where the floor is also pretty good. And if 2 or 3 of those things hit, you are talking about very well, possibly the best defense in the NFL to complement, obviously, a very remarkable offense. But let's wrap up by taking a look at the 49ers schedule, their Vegas odds, and where we kind of project them this year. So they do have a first place schedule, and the divisions that they drew are not necessarily easy. They get the AFC East, which I think is very good outside of New England. They're capable of beating anybody, but Jets, Bills, Dolphins, all on the schedule. I'd much rather get the AFC West, for example, especially when they did still draw the Chiefs. So your AFC opponents, you definitely could have drawn easier. And then in the NFC, they match up against the NFC North this year. To me, the most complete division in the NFC. So I would say their schedule is harder than most, but they aren't underdogs in any game. They do get Detroit at home and Kansas City at home. Those are our two remaining teams, so they should still be favored in those two games. Overall, I mean, their Vegas over-under is 11.5. That's very high. You don't see that very often. I'm not saying I'd bet against that, but I do think the NFL is very deep this year, and there's just better bets to make than to bet on any NFL team to win 12 games. So I'm probably staying away from this. My projection had them at 10.9, rated 11 wins. Now, that's not my prediction. That's kind of like what the TFG Vegas over-under would be. Like if I was setting this, I'd set it at 11 wins over-under, not 11.5. I will have my actual predictions show here in about 3 days on Thursday and show you what I actually think the 49ers record finishes as. But 6-1 to win the Super Bowl, second out there, I think that's fine. If we played this season 6 times, do I think the Niners win it once? Yeah, I do. Division odds minus 190. You're not getting much back there, but I definitely think, especially with the Rams trading away Ernest Jones, that defense is such a worry for me. Seahawks, Cardinals, like I would say the Niners, throwing them in like division winning parlay bets is probably pretty damn safe. They're about as safe to win their division as anybody outside of Kansas City, I would say. So obviously a very rosy projection on the Niners. Just some questions on the O-line, really. Vulnerability in terms of, get them into true drop-back pass situations. I think you can slow down the offense. But when you're ranking 3 in the power rankings, in the top tier of the rankings, it's like, yeah, you can beat anybody. It's just what could hurt you when you're getting into the final 4. That's basically it on the Niners. I don't think there's going to really be any hot takes or criticism of this ranking, but I do expect some people will be surprised that I have the Lions ranked over the Niners. So let me know your thoughts on that right there. That's all we got. We're getting right back into work on the next deep dive. Please do hit that like button on the way out, and we'll see you very soon for the next one. Thank you for watching. Peace out.